he was dealing with something earlier today, so we might as well get started, and if he comes in, then great. If not, we will update him. So, Mr. Manager, take it away.
Thank you, Mayor. Welcome to your first budget retreat for 2021. Seems like we just did this, but we have plans for 2 this year. Today we're going to focus a little bit on overview and then be a little more micro-focused on 2021 and get some direction from you on some budget actions for this year. And then the next one will be focused primarily on 22 and 23, as well as maybe some additional information that we'll receive on federal assistance that's been provided or will be provided to us under the stimulus bill. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth Goltry and Mark Manning to step you through it.
Good afternoon. I am here to present on the to kick off the budget season, really. It'll be the 2022-2023 proposed budget for this year, but we'll be talking today a lot about considerations for the current year, which is 2021. A brief outline for the presentation. I'll provide an overview of the budget process. There will be some changes this year. I'll provide you all a preliminary budget forecast based on the information that we have at hand. Then I'll walk you through what we know so far about the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA. And then at the end, we'll have time for some priority setting regarding the ARPA funding and also in relation to the current budget forecast. So how the budget process, just generally, it's an opportunity for the City Council to set priorities. We really usually just build on the prior year. We have robust engagement efforts through the social media town hall, the in-person budget hearings, resident meetings, and also the the budget simulator. In addition, one of the big work of the budget office is to provide estimates about resources and also funding, the expenditures in the budget. And in the end, in August, the City Council adopts the budget for the next year. So as far as prioritization, the primary thing that sets the priorities for the budget is the City Council mission and the goals for each of the departments. Last year, we went through a really thorough process of prioritizing reductions in the budget. A couple years before that, we'd gone through a prioritization process on ranking all of the services and departments and noting some of those as untouchable. Having this prioritization model allows us to make recommendations to you regarding resource allocation, whether that's reductions or additions. Engagement, this year I will be showing you a preliminary calendar, but we have 4 budget hearings planned. We also plan on using the budget simulator again this year and holding a social media town hall that will overlap with the budget simulator. That's how we did it last year, and it was very successful.
And Elizabeth, it would be at DABS too, I'm assuming,
Oh,
right?
of course, yeah, and that's in the calendar, yeah. And we have those planned for June, so that we'll be able to demo the simulator at the DAB meetings. So I'm excited about that. One of the biggest changes to the budget process this year is an updated tax lid. SB 13 was signed by the governor on March 26th. It requires a notification through a mail-out process on behalf of the county if a proposed budget will exceed the revenue neutral rate. We will find out what our revenue neutral rate is on June 15th. And what we anticipate is that maintaining a flat mill levy, which is what we've done for the last 27 years, will require the notification. The new law impacts the budget schedule because the first public hearing is required to be held by July 15th. Previously, the first budget hearing was required in early August, though we usually had it in mid-July. Then the last hearing can be held between August 10th, which is usually around when we adopt the budget, and September 10th. Preliminarily, this is our budget calendar for the year. We're having our first retreat today. We have another retreat scheduled for May 25th, which will be an opportunity to firm up budget options that we will use in our resident engagement efforts at the DABS and the online simulator and the social media town hall. Preliminarily, we're planning on July 6th is the date for the city council to approve the final budget hearing date, and also that being the meeting for the authorization to exceed the revenue neutral rate. And then we'll wait 2 weeks, and that will be when we present the proposed budget, which is typical of our calendar in the past. We plan on a public hearing in the evening on July 27th, a public hearing during the city council meeting on August 3rd, and adoption on August 10th. And it's important to note that once you publish the final public hearing and adoption date in July, that you have to stick to the final adoption date. So there were some questions about that in the past. So that's what we have on the calendar. And then I'll move into our preliminary forecast. I'm going to start on the revenue side as far as our available resources, and then we'll move into our expenditure assumptions and some issues that we have. I'll provide you with a baseline forecast, and then we'll talk about a potential ARPA funding. This is a 2021 adopted budget that you all approved last August. So it visually shows you what our largest revenue sources are, which are, of course, property tax, sales tax, and franchise fees. These graphs are probably relatively familiar to you. I have, I think, 5 or 6 of them, and we'll move through them quickly. But I'm going to provide you a quick summary of what we expected in 2020, what happened, and then quickly what we're expecting moving forward. Regarding property tax, this graph is actually of assessed valuation. We're expecting, the evaluation for 2020 was set before the COVID pandemic occurred. We thought that there might be some delinquencies, but overall, property tax collections were strong last year. We will get the assessed valuation notice in mid-June. At this point, we're expecting slow growth.
Elizabeth, didn't we finish 2020 higher than we expected?
On property tax?
Yes.
Yeah, it's due to delinquents. We had more current collections in 2020 than we anticipated.
Do you remember what that rate was that we finished at?
You're talking about property tax?
Right.
Yeah. So that usually, he was asking if we had higher property tax collections in 2020 than we had budgeted. And yes, property taxes did come in above budget. We usually see that trend in a period of economic expansion because we have more current property tax collections than we do in periods of downturn where there's more delinquencies. Because the budget for property taxes, it has an allowance for delinquencies in it. And just a reminder, we plan on shifting $500,000 to the debt service fund starting in 2023. So that will constrain the general fund. On sales tax, we expected a downturn in sales tax collections in 2020. That's not what occurred. A lot of that was probably, I guess we'll find out later, but my hunch is that was driven by a lot of people staying home and making purchases locally rather than doing things like traveling. There were also a lot of transfer payments from stimulus funding and unemployment. This is one of our most economically sensitive revenue sources. We're expecting slow growth of 1%, but that forecast was developed before this most recent round of stimulus payments was passed. Franchise fees are a large source of revenue. It's about 20% of the general fund. I know that Mark has really introduced this topic before, that a lot of our franchise fees are 20th century revenues in a 21st century environment, and they're just not as strong as they used to be, particularly telephone franchise fees. This one's heavily impacted by the weather. It was relatively weak last year. To some extent, I think that might be due to lower occupancies in businesses during the pandemic shutdown period. It can be difficult to forecast. At this point, we're expecting very slow and steady growth. Gas tax is about 5% of the general fund. This is one that we forecasted really accurately last year. We had a quarter where there was much lower travel demand, particularly with regard to schools, which drives a lot of trips. Revenues have been flat over the last 20 years, and we're expecting them to pick back up this year and then stay at that flat level. Interest earnings is the roller coaster of revenue, as you see here. When it's going up, it's fantastic. When it's going down, it's a huge letdown. It's driven by short-term interest rates. The lag between interest rates cuts and our revenue collections is about 9 to 12 months. So right now, just as a frame of reference, we had about $10 million in revenue and interest earnings. We're expecting by the end of this planning period to have $200,000 to $300,000. So that alone is a huge hole in the budget. And some of our smaller revenue groups, before we move on, motor vehicle tax, that's the tax based on the valuation of automobiles. That is economically sensitive depending on people's vehicle purchasing habits. Court revenues are pretty sensitive. They were actually pretty strong last year considering how long they were closed. They're dependent on collection activity, collection and enforcement activity. Charges for services was one of our weakest areas in 2020, and we're anticipating that it will stay that way in 2021. These activities, well, charges for services, rents, and license and permit. This category includes things like convention center activity, recreation centers, different permits that people have for businesses. Overall, this was a really weak area. And as we move into the ARPA revenue replacement estimates, you'll see those two things get tied together. So on to the expenditure side.
Sorry,
Hey.
Elizabeth.
Oh, sorry.
Before you move on,
No
I
problem.
just have a question back on property taxes, where it says, we're assuming that mill shift, that 0.5
Yes.
mill shift, that's because we shifted from there, right? That's the reason, okay, just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Yeah, it was 7.5, and then we shifted back a half mil to balance. And so we plan on getting it back to 7.5 mils in the future, and that's what our CIP is based on.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
So on that charges for services, rents, license, is that the other sources part of the pie chart, the 18%? Or is that just a portion of that 18%?
It's part of that. That slice also includes court fines and penalties.
Okay.
And interest earnings,
So that's interest earnings, court, and charges.
license and permit,
Right.
rental income.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Admin fees. I'll stop.
I just want to get a sense.
Yeah,
of
but of the other charges and charges for services, interest, and court are the biggest ones of that slice. You bet. Okay, we're on to the expenditure side. We have put together a model for you to start your discussions today that's based on current city staffing levels. So what we have budgeted is we have put this budget together based on the current level of vacancies we have in civilian full-time positions. I'll show you in a graph next. One of the direction that you all provided us early on was to hold positions vacant, and we were really efficient. We are really effective at holding those positions vacant, and I'll show you what the impact of that has been in the next slide. You also provided direction to keep up with commission staffing, and throughout the pandemic, we continued to have recruit classes for police and fire, and those staffing levels have held steady. So our projection reflects maintaining the current civilian vacancies during this planning period.
be until we get to the budget passed, or is the budget you will be recommending actually still have the understaffed model that we're using?
Yeah, so the planning period is usually what we mean for the 3-year budget. So 21, 22, and 23 is the planning period. And so the projection that'll show you in a current slide, in a few slides, is based on keeping those civilian positions vacant.
We're actually going to assume that when we're back firing on all cylinders, we're not going to need the employees for the programs that we at once canceled during COVID to come back and do those programs again, or?
No.
We're going to do this in steps. So the first step is the base budget, assuming no federal dollars. Then we're going to show you the impact of the federal dollars, which will allow hiring back of at least some of our employees, and we'll cover that with you. Okay.
Don't worry. There's more. There's 20 more slides. Don't worry. Yeah. Yeah, it's just
For the next few slides, for the next 3 years of the plan period.
it's just a
Yeah, the
starting
next few
point.
slides.
Yeah. So this slide here, this is the number of full-time commissioned employees we had on December 31st of the year. This is actually the information that's used by the pension actuary, and you'll be reviewing that report next week. So this is not budgeted positions, this is individuals working for the city of Wichita. And as you've seen, it's had there were some challenges for a couple years just with recruitment, I think, but overall, it's slow and steady growth, and there was an increase from 19 to 20. This slide is of civilian positions. We have decreased over about 450 positions since 2000. During this period here, some of this in the 2008 to 2011, I think it's fair to disclose that some of those position decreases were the result of holding positions vacant. Some of it was also structural due to contracting and different service provision. Like MABCD moved to the county, for example. We contracted out mowing. So some of it's structural and some of it was cyclical. I think it's really important to note that between 2019 and 2020, at the end of the year, we had 90 fewer civilian positions. That's a pretty dramatic drop in 1 year, just by holding positions vacant. So based on that, and also to point out, this is all of our civilian positions, so it also includes utilities and the airport and so forth. So this is not just general fund. So this is a general fund model based on our current revenue outlook without additional ARPA funding and an expenditure budget that's based on continuing to hold those civilian positions vacant. So our snapshot today is that we would have a net gain of $2.2 million this year, a net gain of $1 million next year, and then a deficit of $5.8 million in the third year. And this is our planning period, 21 to 23. And that deficit in the third year is pretty typical of how our projections start out. So I'm going to move into the ARPA now, unless you all have questions about the expenditure projections. All right. So the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 was signed into law in mid-March. At this point, I have looked and I have reviewed what's been available. There's not been a tremendous amount of instruction yet from Treasury on how we will actually apply for and receive this funding. But I still think, when I look back at the budget cycle last year, I think we started earlier than some other cities, and I think it served us well to have an ongoing conversation rather than waiting until we knew all the details. The ARPA is pretty long, and subtitle M is Coronavirus State and Local Recovery Funds. We don't have all the details, and we're continuing to keep up with our professional organizations, particularly GFOA, which is the Government Finance Officers Association, has really taken the lead on providing information to members. There are a couple different sections of the ARPA. We can offset revenue losses, and also it provides funding for specified purposes. There's a couple different allocation formulas in this section. For what they're calling metropolitan cities, the allocation is based on a modified CDBG formula. Based on the information that was provided when it was signed into law, the initial estimate for Wichita is $73.1 million. The first tranche, which I guess is a federal word for bucket, is expected to be available mid-June. It's 50% of the funding, and then there'll be a second tranche. And all this funding will be available through December 31 of 2024. I am going to provide an overview just of the section on state and local assistance. I know that there are other sections that are applicable to transit and airport, for example, with regard to their funding. So I'm just going to provide an overview of this section. Eligible uses in this subtitle M, government activities that would otherwise not be funded due to revenue losses. So this is what we'll be focusing on today, which is the revenue replacement language. Premium pay for essential government workers is covered by this. Assistance to small business, households, and hard-hit industries, as well as economic recovery is in this section, and also water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure.
Does that include, when you say hard-hit industries, does that also include municipally driven industries?
He asked if this what's included in hard-hit industries. I think this section in particular, we're waiting for more definition. But what we'll be talking about today is mostly the first bullet, which is this is the revenue replacement. So.
And the 73.1 million estimate is for all of these, is our estimate for what we think we could get if we're conservatively looking at all of these.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Not
In
just
this
the first
state
bullet.
and local assistance, this is 73 million. It's not for the transit part or the airport part.
Okay.
Or I think there's also a housing section. So they have two very explicit restrictions on the funding. The funding cannot be used to directly or indirectly offset a tax reduction or delay a tax increase. And then also funds cannot be deposited into any pension fund. So GFOA has provided some guiding principles, and I've reviewed them, and I wanted to credit them, and I've added, and I'm sharing some of those with you today. From the top to bottom, things that they are encouraging governments to look at doing. The top one is to replenish reserves that were used in 2020. And keep in mind that this funding isn't just available for the general fund, but can be available for all of the City of Wichita funds. They recommend that you avoid creating new programs or add on to existing programs, since this funding is not sustainable. And it also encourages investment in infrastructure projects that have one-time funding, but particularly ones that would have a reduction in ongoing costs would be preferable. Other ideas to keep in mind regarding coordination, not only will City of Wichita departments be receiving funding, the state is receiving funding, the county will get funding as well. There's also a title for higher education and local education, just making sure that we coordinate on those initiatives so that there's augmentation, so that we're making each other better together rather than duplication. And then coming up with cooperative spending plans that are focused on the overall community. So on the usage of funds, it's really important to make sure that this funding is very flexible. So making sure that we're using other funding on eligible activities and then using this for things that aren't eligible. So for example, there's been quite a bit of funding through FTA for transit, so it's really important to use that funding for transit rather than using this funding for transit. GFOA recommends spreading the use of funds over the eligibility period. I have a hunch that the people in the Congressional Budget Office who've scored this out probably want us to all use the funding in the first year, but there's a tension there. And then also carefully considering all alternative uses before committing to that funding plan. So we do have time, particularly on the community funding side, to really carefully consider things before we jump in. So on the lost revenue section, I feel like it's a pirate movie. ARPA and the lost revenue. The guidance is very tentative. My estimate today is that we will want to request $30 to $62 million of our funding for lost revenue. On general fund estimate is 16 to 47 million, and that is a wide range. And that is because it is unclear at this point as to whether interest earnings will be considered an eligible revenue type for replacement. The economic downturn was certainly tied to the global pandemic, but I don't know if there's a close enough linkage between the global pandemic and the economic downturn and interest earnings for that to be eligible. So will wait and see. Transient guest tax, that's $6 million. That's a fund that was hard hit. The stadium area projects, we delayed the opening of the stadium for a year, so there was obviously lost revenue there. And our other funds are, it goes back to the charges for services. It's the things that just weren't happening for a period last year. A third of our special alcohol revenue goes to the general fund. The other 2/3 go to special park and rec and special alcohol. And then our other hard hit fund was the parking fund, just due to the lack of activity downtown during this period.
Just a quick question. If it's determined that our stadium area, not projects, but Century 2, the stadium itself, if that is eligible under the shuttered venue program, how does that affect this? Can we double dip, or does that now open up more funds to be, how's it affected, I guess?
Again, it will depend if you want to follow the GFO recommendations, but our initial review of that venue, closed venue provisions, we probably will not be eligible for the stadium because there's no baseline, right? The stadium wasn't open at the start of the pandemic. However, we do believe there's a possibility for C2. And the question is whether or not you want to replenish the guest tax plus take that money from the closed venue fund if we are eligible for that. We do know we have improvements we have to make to C2, but that'll be a decision that you make.
And it would be one or the other then? And
It could be both.
or both, okay.
It's possible, yeah.
I have a question on, is lost revenue for transit in one of these categories?
No, in transit revenue, they are already had a pretty large allocation from the CARES Act that needs to be spent by last year. And then I think there was also a transit in the transportation section of ARPA for transit.
Okay.
So I think it's maybe 125% of their annual FTA allocation, something along those lines. So we anticipate that their additional funding through CARES and ARPA should be adequate. So, all right. So in the general fund revenue categories, we've talked about this before, but charges for services. So Century 2, Cowtown, Recreation, a lot of those things that were closed or were providing very limited services. License and permit declined dramatically last year. Rental income, a lot of that is at the convention center, liquor tax, and then potentially interest earnings.
We don't get our liquor tax directly to us. That comes back to us from the state. That's the ad valorem, right?
Yes, we receive it. The state collects it and we receive it, but it decreased a lot.
Yeah. It's not like something we really can count on.
Right, but I think, yeah, it is really volatile, you're right, but I think that what the law says that you compare your last fiscal year to the fiscal year in which the pandemic occurred. So we would take our annual statements from 2019 and compare them to 2020, and then I could be wrong, but at this point, it seems like we would request the funding based on that change.
Yeah, but I don't think they've been paying us for that. I guess that's my point.
Oh.
They haven't been giving us that money. They've been
We've been-
holding it.
Yeah, no, we've
The ad
been-
valorem, right? The
we
federal,
receive.
the liquor tax?
Yeah.
We haven't been getting that from the state.
Yes, it's collected by them and passed on to us.
Has it been? I didn't think it had
Have
been.
they mailed us a check?
We're not getting, but the liquor is.
Liquor is?
It's,
Okay.
There is one that we're not getting. though.
Yeah, I thought liquor was
Yeah.
tied to that.
No, we receive funding, we receive liquor tax for liquor by the drink. The state receives all the revenue for packaged liquor sold in liquor stores. And I know at one point they did talk about reducing, the formula for the liquor tax, but that didn't change because there was a lot of the providers who receive funding from the liquor tax, they presented their case and it wasn't changed. So.
Just a quick question, this might be different. It kind of tags into a previous slide where money can't be used for any type of tax cuts. But when we think about, I guess, the pandemic and the stresses it had on folks in Old Town, let's say, who had businesses that had to abide by different protocols, are we allowed in this to maybe give a discount on those when it comes to what they pay for parking or our liquor license? Or is there something we can do to the service industry, for the service industry, utilizing this money that would hopefully a roundabout way to make them somewhat whole for still having to pay those fees during last year?
If you go back to 24, slide 24, it would fall, I believe what you were talking about, Mayor, would be in bullet point 3.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think too that tagging along on that, it would be really important to coordinate with other governments on what their plan is for assisting.
Gets more bang for our buck that way.
Yeah, so, all right. Where was that? Okay, so a summary on the general fund is that at a baseline, we expect moderate surpluses for 21 and 22, and then the $5.8 million deficit in 23. I'm pretty confident today that our ARPA replacement could be $4 million annually, but it could be more based on the eligibility of interest earnings. At this point, capacity exists to reinstate some reductions that were undertaken last year and or fill vacant positions that have been held for the past, since last March. So just, I have printed out a redo of a version of the list that we put together in June after our May budget retreat. That list the prioritization in that list guided decision-making last year. Quite a lot of those tiered concepts have been implemented in addition to holding positions. And again, we have some capacity for restoration. So just a quick review of the reductions last year.
Why don't we, if we could stop here?
Sure.
So this is where we start to need your guidance. We have identified in the tiers some of the more significant changes that were made, the cuts you made in the budget. And we're looking for guidance now as we work through what we can restore as we have federal money available. Plus, we've got, as Elizabeth said, we've got a little over $2 million where we're in surplus. And so what we'd like to have from this point forward is a discussion. What we'll do is we'll go through the tiers, what we consider to be the major issues in the tiers based on your discussion last year. Then we'd like to come back and have you process and give us instruction on what you want us to consider putting back in 21. Today we'll focus on 21, and 22, 23, we'll talk about that going forward. But these we'll get guidance on because we have to make sure we can sustain those over the 3-year period, right? 21, 22, and 23.
So just I guess for full disclosure, there was a time when we were able to recoup more money than we originally thought. I think that was for partnerships with utilizing the CARES Act money that the county got. There were accounts that were, I guess, originally thought we were going to go into deficit spending with those accounts. Those accounts actually got more money put back into them. And can you just give us, the council, an update on that? Because I think here we're asking, do we want to put money back into some of these accounts, or do we want to continue, or do we want to rehire the positions that we let go and that we currently need? But I just want to make sure that everyone knows we actually did at one point put money back in those accounts. So if you could give everyone that update.
That's a great question, Mayor. And I'm not recommending that we add to what you did with the CARES Act money, but I'll summarize what we did with what you allocated out of the CARES Act. There was about overall it was $12.4 million. And there was about, and staff correct me if I'm wrong on this, but $2.5 million went to reimburse us for direct COVID-19 related expenses. We have $100,000 that we put into enhancing security here for the elevators and all of that we talked about. We have $2 million that went to the 316 project, the overflow shelter. We have $600,000 that went to the innovation fund. And these are reverses of what we were going to do. We were going to take money out of these various funds to balance the budget, and we didn't need to do that because of the CARES Act money. $3 million for our budget stabilization fund, $1.5 million for our pension reserve fund, $200,000 for the economic development and parking fund. We were going to defer, we deferred rate holidays by about $1.2 million. We deferred a guest tax transfer, about $1.2 million as well. And so that, I believe, takes us to the full amount of the 12.4.
What was the last one? I'm sorry.
Guest tax.
Was it 1.2 million?
Yes.
Okay.
And I believe there was a way in which we thought we were spending money, or had to spend money on salaries, I think it might have been our firefighters, and then some of that was actually covered. I thought there was a salary aspect to that as well.
So what we did is our eligible expense for CARE Act dollars actually paid for firefighters. That was a legitimate, identified eligible expense. So that freed these dollars up in the general fund, which we then used to go to the places I just mentioned.
To put them back, or not to hold whole.
Yeah.
Okay.
That way we were not, if we were subject to audit by the county, we could show that we went to an eligible expense, and that's firefighter salaries.
Excellent. Yeah, and I just want to make sure everyone was caught up with we have put some of that money back, so this wouldn't be the first time we would be replenishing those accounts.
Right. So what you'll be looking at now are actually programmatic changes to go ahead and possibly restore some of the cuts that were made in programs.
And just the last question, I guess, as we look at these programs, staffing itself is number 8, but if we were to reinstate, let's say, one of these programs that requires additional staffing, is that self-explanatory?
Yeah,
is it?
right, it's two different things. What we'll do is, for instance, if we just look at tier 1 reductions, the first thing on there is early literacy. That's the restoration of a position in the library. That will not be included in the number that I give you for the amount of positions that are frozen right now that we could also fill a portion of those.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And just to save yourself keeping up with it, on page 37 and 38, once we get there, there is a summary of all these put together. So for now, we'll start on tier 1. So library early literacy, this was a program that was consolidated last year. It connects to our community crime initiative and is one being considered for reinstatement. Arts and cultural services, we reduced the funding in the grants and also to the cultural institutions last year in the budget. It's in the current budget. In MABCD, a position for an inspector was reduced due to a retirement. And in the city manager's office, the internal auditor position is vacant, and that position vacation was due to a position transfer. So in tier 1, these options are $509,000. Also in tier 1 last year are position vacancies. At that point in March, we were interested in keeping positions vacant through the period. Since then, we have added about $3.5 million in vacant civilian positions, which is a considerable amount of savings. The annual cost of all these vacant positions is about $12.5 million. We probably wouldn't be able, we're already in April. So it would be prorated this year. Whoops, wrong way. Oh my goodness. Okay, in tier 2, these are library and park items for the rest of the list. The materials budget was reduced in the library. They focused their existing budget on things that really are targeted at what people are needing during an economic downturn to be looking for jobs. The next two go together. Park tree purchase, when you eliminate the purchase of trees, then the staff that purchases the trees can do the dead tree removal instead. And then, so the second item is canceling the dead tree removal contract. So those really ought to be considered together. And then an option we didn't implement many things in tier 3 because they were even less attractive than the other tiers. But in tier 3 is park grounds maintenance, and that was a social media town hall topic. And so that'll be a reduction in mowing cycles in the right of way. So putting it all together, so all of the tiers, including filling positions, and so this is filling all of the vacant civilian positions in the general fund. It would be $9.5 million this year, and then going up to 13.6 next year, since we already have 4 months behind us as far as vacancies go. And how it looks relative to our initial forecast. So we have an initial net gain of $2 million. If we were to implement everything in the tiers and get the more conservative estimate on the ARPA revenue replacement, we would have a net loss of $3.3 million. So unfortunately, we cannot reinstate all of the things on the list and hire all of the positions. So that's where you come in.
So, and all these things on the list are things we normally do? Or is there anything, is this reinstating pretty much the city of Wichita's government as it was before the pandemic?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So we're getting $73.1 million as a conservative estimate, which seems like a lot more than a 20-something million that we had to cut over 2 years, 24 million roughly. I could have that number wrong, but even if it's wrong, it's still utilizing that money from the recovery package to help us get whole again. How come we still can't get whole?
I want me to jump in, or do you want to?
Would you go to that slide?
Which one?
The one that,
This one?
no, it's earlier than that.
Okay.
Hold on, let me find it. Go to 29.
29. Oh, I was so close. Yeah, So the issue at hand is that the lost revenue portion of the language it provides very flexible funding for us to reinstate programs that we weren't providing. But as far as our lost revenue goes, we are estimating conservatively $4 million a year, and then more if interest earnings are strong. But if you remember back to the fourth quarter report and then the projections earlier in this presentation, if we're comparing 2020 to 2019, we had a really strong year for property tax and sales tax, for example. And so we can't recoup that revenue. There's no lost revenue to recoup in those categories that are our biggest revenue types.
Wait, so it's the stadium era project, we can't recoup money for that because we don't know what it brings in, and that's looking at $3 to $4 million a year, and our projected deficit for the next few years is $3 to $4 million. So is it because we can't recruit from the stadium, or are we putting a cushion in case the stadium doesn't actually bring in that much?
Yeah, I'll ask Mark to talk about that. We had revenue that we were to get directly from the club that we didn't get because there was no season. And then we had money coming from TIF and CID and sales tax that were all projected and based on, in some cases, existing districts. And we can document that we did not get the revenue anticipated from those districts.
Okay, and yeah, in the
That's also-
any of the money then can't reimburse it because we don't have a track record where it's brand new. So that makes sense if that's what's going on. I don't know, Mark, let me.
It's also one time, because we'll have revenue coming in going forward. Where
Correct.
we were supposed to.
Correct. Although during the planning period, 24, we may have, our growth has moved down the road, right? So
Right.
there's probably an element of catch-up that we actually will not receive in 23, for instance, that we anticipated.
Sure.
Yeah, or go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, everything Major said is correct, but Mayor, let me see if I can answer your question this way. I think if I understand what you're saying is, why do we think we'll get $73 million, but we showed on that slide that Elizabeth showed that we would still have deficits? I think maybe the answer is, of that $73 million, we only think a portion of it will be applicable to the general fund. The rest of it may be applicable to those other categories. I think it was on slide 24. But I don't think that we believe that we can spend the entire $73 million on general fund type activities.
No, of course not, but that's why I think Elizabeth, and this is where I'm just confused. I thought Elizabeth mentioned that money that is earmarked, or word we still use, like money that is earmarked for this or that wasn't included in the estimate. So if it's earmarked for housing, we're not counting it in that 74. So, but that might be what's going on, and maybe the,
Well, not really. It has to do, we have to tie it back. This is the quirk about it. It's not that we tie it back to lost services. We have to do it on the lost revenue side, right? And so the wild card here is interest. We could realize substantial funds, backfill funding, if we're allowed to declare all or a portion of our lost revenue on interest, right? If that is, we tie that back to the pandemic and the impact it had on the economy, and we get guidance from the Treasury and others, then this number, because you'll see we had 4 million, a little bit more than 4 million over the 3-year planning period, and actually then would extend into 24 as well, I believe, to some degree. So you can see there are the numbers that we feel pretty safe to represent today are available. It could very well be that next time that we meet, we'll have better guidance and we'll be asking you to restore other programs or fill vacancies because we'll have received favorable rulings on the use of interest, lost interest.
and that's perfect. That's exactly what I was trying to figure out here. And we're not waiting on an act of Congress. We're waiting on Treasury to tell us we can count the interest, and if so, it's a game changer. We might be able to not have to cut $8 million out of the budget.
And this happened to the county when they were administering CARES Act funds. There were interpretations coming down the road all the time. If you remember, they were shifting in terms of the uses of funding as they got more guidance.
Right. Okay. Oh, my goodness.
So I think what we want to do is go back to the tiers.
Right.
I have a question.
You bet.
Before we do that. I'm trying to reconcile slide 29 with slide 38. And I know that's what we were just talking about, and so I understand some of it, but on slide 29, the general fund estimate for lost revenue is 16 to 47 million. But we only believe that a little over 12 million is eligible for ARPA funding.
There's a year not on here.
Yeah.
What's that?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
24 is not on here. We have.
Oh,
ARPA.
that's right, so
Yeah.
it's 16. So we're taking that low end of this, of the general fund estimate.
Today we are.
Okay.
Yeah, 2024 is a year outside of our planning period for the budget, so.
Okay.
Right.
And then so that's 16 of the 73 million that we
Right.
think we're gonna get. And so when you add in these others,
Other
it
funds,
gets us
right.
up to closer to 73,
Yeah.
not 73 yet.
Yeah, I think on the low end for what we've got here, and again, it really it depends on so many things, but is the 30 million. So the low end for the revenue replacement category will be 30 million, and the high end for revenue placement is 62. And then overall, there's 71 or 73 million, 73.1. Right.
So but we don't have enough guidance from Treasury to know if all of these things are eligible yet, is why we're
No.
not up to the 73.
Yeah,
Okay.
right. But I feel confident today, I still feel confident today, that the $4 million in revenue replacement that we have estimated on this slide here is solid. And that is enough, at least for today, we can start to, you all can start to make some decisions about filling positions or reinstating items from the tiers that were reduced last year.
Okay. Thank you.
That's where we are right now. So I'll go back to the tiers. There we go. So would you like to take this over, city manager? Or
So,
what?
one thing that's not in the tier one reductions that we had to do out of necessity was the aquatics program, because they were all closed.
Right.
It wasn't necessarily a reduction that we did, but because they were all closed.
Okay, so
They
what
were
we're,
cut.
right, but we did not anticipate savings in '21 from the closure. In tier one, we only showed savings in '20.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what
So
we're
it's-
focusing on now are 21.
So it's in the 21
Yeah,
projected.
it's
Right.
fully funded in
Okay,
2021.
all right.
There were some things in there, especially in tier 0 and tier 1, that were just 2020, we're not open this year, savings, and that's
Okay.
not on the shorter list that we're providing today. So,
And that's why, so we got to find $4 million using 2021's estimates here. But that's why with the pool closing, there's no savings in 2021, it's
That's
zero
right.
because we're not going to close the pools.
yeah.
I think
Okay.
probably the easiest way to frame this is if you look at the list of items, forget the vacant positions for a second. If you tell us what the priorities are for these others, then we can tell you where we can be with vacant positions. Because if you were to restore everything in these three tiers, we probably could bring back somewhere between a third and a half of our vacant positions and be sustainable with our current estimates. And so anything you don't put back in the list helps us hire some other positions. But, again, we try to identify services that you had significant discussions about.
Right.
So that's what these are. They're not everything that's.
Not
That's
everything.
right.
Because there's a whole
And the reason
list.
we didn't want to bring you back through that list is if we go through a lot of those line items, some of them we took care in the CARES Act. Some things were actually implemented partially during the budget, and it just gets to be a fine point in talking about those issues. These are the ones that were not funded and we are not doing right now in '21 because of your actions to balance last year.
Okay.
So on your list that you have, the longer list in front of you, the library early literacy outreach services, that's on page number 7, it's item 22. And the position that was eliminated was one that did outreach and is, I think, really focused on their early childhood efforts, which is one of their core services that they have a niche in. So, And then,
as we're putting the budget together for '22, one of the initiatives we'd like to start, and I think I've talked to all of you about this, is a program to attack youth violence. And so this position is part of that overall strategic strategy, if you were to restore it.
So, are you talking about the Mayor's Challenge Grant?
Yes.
Okay, so if we were to receive that Mayor's Challenge Grant, then this position here would be covered under that, or the functions of this position would be somewhat covered under that? Is that what you are saying?
Yes,
Okay.
well, I don't know, I'm not sure that's in the million or not. I'd have to go back and look. Obviously, it's what if we get the million, it's a one-time deal, so we'll have to look at, sustainability.
Is there anything on this, because I'm kind of interpreting this as if we restore all this, but we still got to find 4 million roughly, where do we cut, or what do we keep off the table? And I'm wondering, is there any opportunities as we kind of bring some of this stuff back to partner with the county on some of these services, where, instead of completely taking away, let's say, community partnership funding, could we work with them we'll save 100,000 instead of, and they add the other 100,000 and we have a joint mission? Is there any collaborative efforts that we could be utilizing that's just not so black and white with this?
Yeah, I think the one that jumps off the page would be cultural institution funding, the grants and cultural institutions. Everything else is really more focused to us. The MABCD inspector is our housing program, and the internal auditor, of course, is just us. And then on library materials is our system, and same with the park, and tier 2 and tier 3. Those are all focused inside the city boundaries, and I think there'd be some resistance of the county in terms of helping with that. And again, we're working towards the consolidation of our park and rec services and cultural services, but we're not there at this point.
so the arts and cultural services, that's on the bottom of page 7. It's number 29 and number 30. So we reduced the grants to outside agencies by 5%, and also the contracts with the institutions that are housed at City of Wichita facilities. So, and whoops,
go ahead.
Oh, no problem. And MABCD, that is an inspector that's vacant. The impact of that change is that the areas that each inspector covers are larger, so they're less likely to be able to take on proactive work. So that is the impact of that, and that is very much the City of Wichita activity because it's part of our ordinances. And the internal auditor, that is a position that provides, that does audits of our activities, and that position is currently vacant, and it's one that we held open for a bit, so. And that is also, let's see, that is on page number 8, it's number 38. It just describes more the process that a management analyst has been able to fill in on some of the functions during that vacancy.
So the question is, this is the time for a discussion on priorities, what your thoughts are about these 4 items first.
I think we definitely need an internal auditor, particularly if we're going to be, it's good to have another set of eyes if we're going to be utilizing these different funds and, trying to keep up with Treasury, I guess, with any of the guidelines. We should probably have the auditor, so that's one I think should be a priority. The cultural arts services, that would be interesting if we could team up with the county for any of that, even if it's, if there's an opportunity to utilize some of I think they estimate a little over 100 million coming in from the Recovery Act. Even if it helps us get through a couple of years, we're a regional economy, they obviously benefit, we all benefit from arts and culture. I wonder if there's any room for collaboration over on that side.
So what we cut from the arts and cultural services is 5% reduction in the grants that we've worked out standing. So that's not really an opportunity for us to collaborate with the county unless I'm mistaken. I mean, that's cash that we give to organizations for them to be able to, provide the services that they do in the community. So it isn't like we're paying for something and now they can do something instead. It was the grants that we award out. Does that make sense? Am I right? Okay.
You're right, it's a matter of whether they want to participate in the grant program as
Yeah.
well.
Okay.
Yeah, they could still participate though, that's what, and if we had a joint grant program, or if we're thinking, we want to keep this community strong, the arts and culture community, if we look at this as a cut, would you guys be interested in picking up the slack for the rest of the money for the next year?
I think and the justification is because of the turmoil or the stress that the cultural institutions have felt during the COVID period.
Right, well, exactly, and we all benefit. I mean, the county benefits, or a regional economy, so I'm just wondering if it's a grant program and not like a funded position, that makes it almost easier to give money to a pot or to split up that's much easier than, let's say, having a joint internal auditor, right? So that was my thought. If it's a grant program, if we get them or interested in them developing a grant program as well, then we could keep the community whole while saving our budget as well if we ask them to participate.
I'm curious on this category too, on whether it might be eligible not in the revenue replacement to shore up the general fund category, but in the assistance to community organizations and community businesses and hard-hit industries. I think that is certainly a possibility because particularly on the performing arts side, I think they were pretty hard hit. So we could put that one into consideration for being funded that way once we get more direction, I guess, for lack of a better term, from Treasury.
Kind of where I was going with that third bullet point under eligible uses. When it talked about hard-hit industries, you could certainly make a case that
Cultural.
our attractions had a hard hit, whether it's convention center, performing arts, or our cultural facilities that are owned and operated by us.
So that would shift the discussion from today to that other tranche.
Right.
Yeah.
On the internal auditor position, if we had that, does it save us any money with the audit that we require outside?
Yes. That's an external audit, but I think that an internal auditor, particularly one that's focused on performance auditing and performance reviews, could really make some strides in savings and efficiency. So.
But it doesn't reduce any of that expense?
No, it doesn't reduce the expense for the external audit. That's a separate function.
But there is opportunity maybe to find some savings.
Yeah.
Tie that to their performance.
So the cultural institutions, when it comes to performing arts, would they have access, or would we, for this pot, when it comes to the shuttered venue type of possible resources? Do you know what I mean? Because a shuttered venue who is also performing arts.
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, and that's maybe a reason for us to delay this, as Brian had talked about, to the next discussion of, a discretionary money, because on top of that, I don't know that many of them would fall under shuttered venue, but I know some of them receive PPP. In fact, the Art Museum received 2 rounds of PPP, and you're going to want to consider that probably. And I hadn't thought about that when we put this on the list, but it's not as if in their case they didn't receive federal assistance already to help. So if you move it to another day for another discussion, then we can talk about what your criteria would be to help agencies.
Yeah, I think I'd be more comfortable with that because I think there might be some variables that we might not see or some opportunities to keep our arts and cultural services as strong as possible.
Okay.
As I look at the MABCD inspector, and if the people with places goes through, do we already have place setters for any additional city resources we may need for that, or? I'm just curious.
Not yet, Jeff, and if we did, it would be above and beyond this position, right? Because this is a position that we just held in housing because we didn't have the funding for it. But I think what we'd see with Places for People wouldn't be as much as this property maintenance. It's going to be more in terms of rehab and new construction and what we need to do to support that. I don't know that we talked a lot about beefing up this piece of MABCD as a result of that. But it's an important component, right?
If we had it,
Yeah.
I'm very concerned about that MABCD inspector. I mean, I don't see how that cannot be number one or number two on this priority list, especially in terms of blight. We're going to lose 2 people already due to retirements this year and next year. I think that inspector position has to be considered number 1 or number 2.
And Jared makes a good point. I mean, every day I get emails
I'm
that
very
relate to
concerned about
this, to
blight.
that position being open, or or how, I know this is just one, but I think we have more than that we could fill. And it's, it takes a long time, and there's a lot of stress on these inspectors because they cover such big areas now. So it's,
Mayor, did you have an issue you responded to? I was just reading where we only had 1 inspector for the whole city on one of the issues. I think it was grass clippings or
Yeah.
something.
yeah.
So tall grass.
so, one inspector about grass clippers, is that, or one that we lost?
Your email, you sent an
Yeah,
email the
it
other
You
was
day
sent an
email
email
came from
yesterday?
about grass clippings that,
I think Janet maybe sent.
yeah, Janet
Oh,
had
I
responded to
okay, I
it.
thought it was
But
from
it
you
came
directly.
from your email address.
Sorry, I thought, well, and I thought you were referring to the notes here. For a second, I thought that the inspector position was for grass height. Is what I just interpreted where I thought we could probably hold off on that one, but, okay.
Where are you?
Is there an easier list of things that we can cut from?
Well, that's
literacy is
what-
pretty important.
yeah.
Yeah, we're talking about restoring. So
Yeah, we're talking
okay,
about
yeah.
putting things back, so that's the good news.
Do we know
So,
Do we know if anybody backfilled any other agencies on the library and the early literacy? I mean, we talked about that when we did this, to reaching out to some other groups to see if they had the capacity.
Yeah, there was
Nothing?
Nothing that I'm aware of, no.
yeah, I think that there's 2 things going on. I think that while
So
they were
maybe it
providing fewer services, they were able to cover things like this better, but now that they're back to a more normal service level, they see it's like they've tried it and they see what's happening, and those branch librarians, the early childhood librarians or the children's librarians at the branches are not able to do the early childhood outreach that this position does. It's
I mean, I
just,
think when we talk-
they've tried and it's just not,
Right, no, I
it's not been
understand that. I was just
feasible.
hoping that somebody else might have picked it up if it was that critical.
Yeah, I think this is one
Yeah,
of
like the
these cases
schools or
where this
something.
is
Right,
our
anybody.
niche.
So, I
Yeah.
mean, just based off of that, I've had no feedback from it. I'd say bullet points 4 and 3 are the most
Yeah.
So,
priority.
so you're saying 2 and 3 are the top for you?
4 and 3,
4 and 3, okay.
auditor and inspector. And then, again, we got to wait and see a little bit more on the arts and cultural, if there's other opportunity, and then
And I'm wondering with the literacy, so, and I could be, at one point, it was the PBS station, our local KPTS station used to have a literacy outreach program. And they were funded from the state, and then when the state got into crisis, they had to cut that part. And it was passing out books, it was a whole literacy program. I think I interned there when I was an undergrad. And it was, they filled in some of this space. And I don't know, is there, and I only bring them up because they also were interested in an Eagle article about possibly utilizing some city-owned space for their headquarters. And I'm just wondering, could we, if we were to somewhat go after that position, could we also look towards fulfilling literacy as a need in our community with a more collaborative approach to a nonprofit that has either been in this space, or if we figured out a way to house a nonprofit that is interested, they could save the $100,000 in which they use to reenact a program that they have a history with. Is there a way that we can still get more early literacy in our community and play a role in that if we wind up taking this away from the direct role of our librarians?
Yeah, we could Child Start is the agency that makes the most sense in terms of who we partner with. The reason that you haven't heard an outcry is that this position makes sure that we provide resources to child care facilities. And you know what happened to child care facilities during the pandemic, right? So either they shut their doors or they had limited services that were provided. As they ramp back up, the whole idea is to make it more than just a babysitting service, but we want to try to impact childhood learning pre-K. Which is, again, part of our outcomes, desired outcomes, to have our children reading at grade level by 3rd grade. So Head Start also Child Start plays in that space, especially in terms of administration of Head Start. I don't have any problem in terms of engaging them, asking library staff to engage them on a model that if we're going to ramp back up and bring this position in, that we look at desired outcomes in a partnership with Child Start. And if you wanted us to go in that direction now, we could do that. We could talk about doing that in 22, not restore this now, but lay the groundwork now for restoration in 22. It's up to you. But I do think this is an important, if we look at desired outcomes for the community, I think this is an important one.
It was important on Project Wichita as well.
Yeah.
I would say MABCD would be my number one, and any other vacant position in MABCD as far as inspectors go. The library early literacy position, I like the mayor's idea of a collaboration with the county, potentially on arts and cultural services, and then the internal auditor.
Yeah, and I would tend to agree. I think the last two are pretty direct. The first two, there are probably the most opportunities for collaboration or for a type of shared approach, or to still hit those goals, I guess. So if we could kind of explore more what the options for number 2, and if it's Child Start or anything that kind of hits the literacy, I guess, goals in our community, then yeah, could we be more creative, still achieve those goals while getting ourselves out of that particular position?
I really like the mayor's direction on the arts and cultural collaboration with the counties.
Are you sure? I don't normally get compliments, so.
I just have a
Really?
question about that.
Good idea, I like it.
I like the idea too. I'm just curious if the county's in the position to have additional funding, because of some of the state legislation, my understanding from speaking to a few of the commissioners, if some of the state legislation happens that could happen, they were going to be in a pretty significant budget.
Some of their stimulus money, right?
Yeah.
We don't know, that bill's still being worked right now, the newest version of it. But I think we're tying this to COVID reductions, and I think that's how you get them, at least get into the discussion.
Because they were saying that potentially even like a double-digit reduction in services that they were going to have to cut.
Yeah, so now it's changed again.
Okay. Imagine that.
They would pay 1/3 of the business loss, and the state would pick up 2/3, and it would come out of their stimulus funds. But again, there is no firm bill. It keeps getting worked.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we would have to get them in a room and talk to them, of course, but this last year, I think, have shown a really good potential for collaboration with them on projects in which we work together on. With ICT1, I only get, there's very few things I get good emails about, but one of them is the collaboration of them utilizing the city's library and their vaccination program, and how smooth it is and how great it is. So we've had just a lot of luck with collaborative programming with the county this last year. This is just, to me, seems like an opportunity if they were interested, and if they're not, they're not, but we could at least approach the subject and hopefully keep our arts and cultural services as strong as possible.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is inspector, internal auditor, will work with Child Start. We'll have the library reach out to Child Start, and if there's other agencies, and then we will bring something back to you about what this will look like, this model on early literacy. But we'll keep focus on 21 to try to develop that. And then we're going to hold off on the arts and cultural services until we've talked to the county, and also probably move that into the discussion of the other resources. that are going to hard hit on industries. So not coming necessarily out of this general fund money, but that way we'll can talk about criteria about whether or not they receive PPP loans and other, because I don't know that a one-size-fits-all will work in this case. You probably have some museums that didn't qualify and others that did and received, $300,000, $400,000 in outside assistance through PPP.
And I understand that, funds could have backfilled for
Right.
lost revenue. I'm a little unclear on collaboration with the county, because what we do with these funds is we grant money to organizations or artists that asked us for grants. And we fund these, the Art Museum, the Indian Center, City Arts in Cowtown, while the county funds, my understanding is that, so they fund Exploration Place and the zoo and others like that. So I thought we had separated those, long before I was on council.
Right.
Kind of separated those and said, county, you take care of those, city, you take care of those. So I'm unclear on what the collaboration would be.
I guess I won't interrupt here for Bob answers. I'm looking at, the opportunities we've taken advantage of with Parks and Recreation.
Yes.
And I'd like to, lessons learned, opportunities we've picked up there, or the replication opportunities with arts and culture.
I think you're laying the groundwork for what could happen after the merger, right? Is that you're going to take you're probably going to have a different funding model for cultural
That one,
services
yeah.
once we
Okay.
go forward. I don't know that you'll establish it exactly here, but at least you're starting those discussions.
Okay.
And particularly with grant funding opportunities, I'd like to know, what are you getting from the county, and kind of try to balance it out a little bit better where we're all communicating about the same community.
But they're gonna have the same challenges with their cultural facilities that we've had this
Yeah.
last year too. I mean, they've all struggled, so.
But if they're doing grants, I'm not aware that they're doing arts and cultural services grants, but maybe they are.
I don't know that.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't
I
know,
don't
but I would like, that's something I would like to.
Yeah, so certainly the research into it would be good. Okay.
Yeah, and that's, we obviously can't make any commitments on another governing body, but my thought is there was an idea floating around of more collaboration, particularly with our cultural and arts institutions. We've had an incredible year of collaboration. They will be getting one-time funds for COVID, and they have, and we might be able to come up with something. I mean, we might as well try, and I think that with smart people in a room who have the similar goal of saving our arts and cultural community here, I'm sure we can figure out a way to do it, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Okay. All right, we'll skip the vacancies and come back to that after you've been through the next two tiers. So you've got three items here. Materials, the $100,000 has been traditionally used for print materials. However, we've seen a change in practice, right? Print and electronic materials. And they'll continue to move more toward subscriptions electronically, all of that. They'll make that determination, the library board working with their staff. But this was probably one of your.
So we cut their material budget last year, and this is to either.
So they could reinstate that this year.
So would the purchased trees be a higher priority than dead tree removal then?
These two actually go together.
Yeah.
So what we do is generally there's a contract for the dead tree removal. And so that frees up the staff who are planting the trees. So we have to contract out the dead tree removal to free up the staff to be able to purchase the trees. And there are a lot of vacancies in the forestry division right now.
Sorry, when you said we have an over-mature tree
Over-mature
canopy,
tree.
how does that translate into, so we're losing more trees than we're gaining?
Yeah, we have a lot of trees at the end of their life cycle. Big trees. So that's what that
Plus you lose them to
means.
disease. I mean, it's a significant, we've had a significant drop in our canopy over the last, almost in the time I've been here, even with this money in. So,
Coincidence?
Tree gravel.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I forgot about
Yeah,
that.
you haven't let me close the animal shelter yet either.
It's been before my time.
And on tree removal, and it's not in the report, but I know Forestry could tell us, they're like months or years behind on tree removal.
It's better, yeah, I think they have quite a list, though I think it's in a better, I think they were making ground, but after this, I think they're losing ground again,
Yeah.
probably.
But I know, like, I've called, for folks, and if it's not a tree that's gonna damage something, they're like, yeah, well, it's on the list.
But I do think Elizabeth's right. A couple of years ago, we actually started to get rid of some of that backlog. We were able to get to trees much
Yeah.
quicker on our list, but
Yeah.
yeah, that's not where we are today.
No.
I don't believe.
Well, the order this is in would be my priority list. Library first, tree purchase second, and dead tree 3.
Bob, can I ask you a question? And this may be a silly question, but I think it's worth asking. So are the tiers like super, super, super solid, or could they be in any way dotted? Because what I'm kind of thinking is, and no is a perfectly acceptable answer, but, the library, the early literacy, I believe a lot in that. Number one predictor of adult health and adult incarceration is third grade literacy. So, I mean, it's a really important issue to me. It's 104,000, this is 100,000. The folks at the library are really smart people. I mean, it's almost like, I don't know, I'm just wondering if there's any opportunity to say, would you rather have a person or would you rather have the materials? But I don't know how solid the lines are of the tiers.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think.
Does
I feel like they get
anybody
double
understand what
whammy.
I'm saying and can say it
Yeah.
more
I-
articulately?
No, definitely
I think
understand.
another way to look at it is if your preference is to go more with reinstating the itemized things that were reduced last year, like the library materials and the tree purchase, then what we can do is just slim down the filling of the other vacancies to get us to being balanced.
Exactly.
Is that helpful?
You can restore all of these and we can fill about half, right?
Yeah.
Roughly,
Or a third,
roughly half
yeah.
of our vacancies.
Okay.
Yeah, because this is only but it's $1.2 million.
Right.
And the vacancies
Are
are
9.
8.3,
Yeah.
well, in 2021,
Yeah.
12.4.
Right.
So you still can fill a lot of vacancies.
Mm-hmm.
And so we left off two on the list for tier 1, right? We basically left them off. So that can go back to filling more positions?
Yeah.
Am I correct?
Yeah,
Yes.
filling
Well,
other
except one of those was early literacy, and we're bringing something back to you. You may go back and restore that at your next retreat, right? The 104.
Yeah.
The 180 right now, it sounds like we're moving out of this category, right? So that, yes, that allows us to fill, a couple of vacancies maybe.
So and maybe we gotta get more in the weeds with this, and I know we're scratching the surface today, but when it comes to the vacancies, I want, when we had budget problems for the state and we targeted vacancies or full-time equivalents and so on, that was a direct correlation to the problems in Department of Labor right now. That departments suffered, and then they suffered with retaining people. It costs more to hire staff than it does to keep them. Staff left because they were overworked, they could find other stuff. It caused organizational problems. It was more than just the spreadsheet. So I worry about it we're gonna get 2/3 of the staff back, or half the staff back, or so much. Like I worry. I would like to know more details of what the departments, what we would be doing, like the strategic plan to make sure that our organization stays as strong as possible as they come out of COVID, and frankly, they'll probably have more responsibilities coming out of COVID because things will be opening back up and more people will be coming out.
And along those lines, I think, Mary, we have to also realize that we have gotten smarter and maybe more efficient over the last year because we've had fewer bodies, and maybe all of those positions don't need to come back.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And so we may not have to be looking at refilling every one of those vacancies. I would hope that we've gotten smarter and more efficient and figured out new technology and so forth, that maybe not all of those are necessary.
Because something
So-
like a library can't be, I mean, you need a body, right? But there are some other things where efficiencies could be helpful and some way to kind of look at that. I mean, what has to be staffed
I
versus.
checked out a book via online and didn't have to have a body.
Yeah.
And I'm reading it on my phone right now.
But somebody has to be a library, be a, lifeguard.
No, and I think Councilmember Fry brings a good point. We talk about the post-COVID economy, the next economy, and we'll be a part of that as well, where we will see a lot more. We had pretty much a crash course in the adoption of technology. A year ago, none of us knew what Zoom was. Now we all do. Some of us are good at it, some of us aren't. But we're getting there. So I think you're right there. I'm trying to make this relatively the same point that you're making, where things are going to be different moving forward. I hope that we can be more strategic in the hiring of this, so we can have as many services without having a negative effect on the organization as a whole in the long term.
So I'm going to try to keep you out of the process that Dante and I are actively involved in, which is position by position justification for the departments. But what I do think we should, what I'd like to do, that I think we can do fairly quickly, is give you a list of what I think are our immediate hires, what we need to do, and tell you this is what our plan is. We've got recreation programming, we've got golf, of course aquatics, we've already freed up
MABCD.
those. So we have to show all of that. I'll show you those that we really need to do from a programming standpoint. And then I'll probably give you some categories that we're looking at that would be the next priorities for us. And we're having those discussions that you're talking about right now regarding not so much even justification for all the positions, but because we've changed our business model, do we need to change the positions that are frozen into something else that better matches our service delivery now?
Makes sense.
Well, I'll do that, but this is a work in progress, right? And we have some places that unfortunately, because of the timing of retirements and resignations, they're really, it goes back to what you were saying there on workflow, they're really lopsided because they had a disproportionate number of losses during this period of time. So we need to bring some balance back to those as well. But we'll go ahead and share that. So that was what we were going to talk about, is that second part of Tier 1.
So back to the materials and the trees,
Yeah.
the little trees and the dead trees.
If you want us to restore the tree program, that's kind of the question. I'm hearing support for the library materials, is that right?
Yeah.
And then, do you want to restore the tree program, put it or keep it on hold?
Can we give them half the money? If they're behind anyways, then did they utilize all last year's budget?
We
just
held
did-
this from them, so they haven't received any of this.
So
right?
they need the money to go forward. They're not on
Right.
hold because of work, they're on hold
Right,
because
this
they-
was
Yeah.
cut from the budget, so.
And I think they do their work as crews. Does that make sense? So it's hard to split a crew. I think they're the ones who volunteered this information, and I think that's the rationale behind it.
Just like to point out, you have to have trees before you can have books.
Unless it's digital, Brian. Unless you just downloaded your book as you bragged about. No, so
Yes. Our forestry canopy's so bad, you have to download an ebook.
How long have you been here?
I would like to restore it.
Restore them.
Yeah.
What about the library people? It's a double whammy.
But you can do all of them and just
Let's do
slim
them all.
down the number of other positions that you're refilling.
Okay, yeah, let's look into that.
We could have the arborists talk to you, Mayor.
The who?
If you've not had them talk to you, we.
No, I want no problems with, what are they, botanists or any of those folks who have dedicated their lives to ensuring that we have strong plants and trees. No, I don't want any problems with those folks. So, yes, let's restore and take a look in, as long as the library also is in restore mode as of now.
I'm going the wrong way.
Okay.
So sorry.
So we're
Hold
the-
on, and this is, yes, Tier 3, Parks Ground Maintenance. This is another source of phone calls. We asked residents during the social media town hall, would they rather reduce cycles in parks or cycles in the right-of-way? And the preference was in the right-of-way. And this, I believe, is on Goodness. It's a tier 3.
You haven't realized the impact of this yet because we're
It
just
hasn't,
starting
yeah.
growing season.
It's
But this summer and fall was going to be tough.
It's
So-
on page 15. It's number 73.
Is there a way, because I hear about this a lot too, but is there a way to get like native grasses in the right-of-ways to where it won't grow too tall to be a site obstruction, but we don't have to maintain it too much? Like grasses that grow 3 or 4 inches and that's it. So like for medians and stuff, and then we can focus more work on parks to get those cut. Because like Redbud Park, I hear about it when it's cut at 5 weeks instead of 3. Because it's a little field out there, but if we had more of our medians and maybe some of the right-of-ways that aren't connected to folks' yards, like native grasses that are short, maybe that helps out with costs.
We can, that won't impact us, because obviously you have to do that planting, and it takes a couple of years to get established. We've not had a lot of luck in terms of public acceptance of native grasses, and in some cases you have to burn it off, right? But where we've done it in parks, we've had people rebel, and we've actually had to go back and change, and go back to fescue or some other.
We had grass rebellions
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
before my time.
Yeah, and I wish I remembered the park, but it was brutal.
Also along Riverside.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, Riverside's another one too.
Yeah.
There was an actual parkland, and people kept taking pictures, and because all we were doing was getting rid of the thistles and letting the material get established, and people came unglued.
Yeah,
But I do think they've gotten used to it now in Riverside along the river where we only mow it twice a year.
Right.
But at first they were, but I think now they realize, okay, that's
Right.
supposed to be like that. And it's beautiful because it has the flowers and all that.
I'm more than happy to look at that on a long-term basis in terms of the strategy going forward.
And maybe it's just certain places. I didn't realize there was rebellion on that, but if there's certain places where it would be less rebellion.
We
then-
both heard it during our park.
So, and that's
You should have seen the email.
the Great Grass Rebellion before you and I got involved. So there also, and maybe there's a median in this, and I don't know, but there are the biology departments, or probably not the right department, over at K-State, for example, actually has genetically modified grass for Kansas. Like, is there a type, and this would be an investment of a few years to actually grow it, but yeah, is there a medium somewhere that we can not make another rebellion while also not bring in grass that's not native here and thus needs more
We'll do
resources?
some investigation. K-State's the exact, that's where you want to go for that kind of discussion. Yeah. In the previous life, we worked with Iowa State to do something similar.
Oh no, we don't want to do that. Let's go to the grass biologist at K-State.
Okay, we'll take a look at it. So do you want us to restore the 198 and then understand we got a long-term thing we're going to look at?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
so it looks like,
You never thought we'd get so much into the weeds, did you?
Oh. Did people online hear that one?
I couldn't help myself.
I don't know where Megan is, but she's Googling at that right now.
so Mark can check me on this, but I think that we have reduced 0.3% out of the tiers from the two things that you're delaying with the arts and culture and the library. So to balance this year, we could do $6.5 million in position fills, maybe, I think.
That sounds a little rich.
No, okay, no, that's not right.
Yeah, for sustainability
No, okay,
purpose.
let's see. We're at 3.3 here, but what you've given us is a smaller list, so we're at -3. So I think we had 8.4 in position fills, so 8.4 minus 3 is 5.4.
Right.
So, and I think we have about $12 million in positions, so that seems like about 40% of the list or so.
It's about where, yeah.
So we'll work through a process on that.
Okay.
It's hard to do math in front of people standing up. So.
It's just hard to do math.
Yeah, well, it's really not that hard, but.
I know we're going to explore arts and cultural services and library early literacy, but I hate for us to lose sight of those if those partnerships don't work out. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so hopefully we can, and then I understand we're scratching the surface, we might hear back from Treasury in which we don't have to make those cuts. And just to get to the Vice Mayor Emeritus, Clay Combs' question is I almost always call you Vice Mayor, so that we still will continue those conversations. That's clear, and hopefully we can come up with some type of collaborative solution.
This helps us because this gives us an interim solution for 21, which we've kind of just been frozen until we can have this session.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think this is the last slide on what we planned on finishing up today and then where we'll go next. So as we hear more about ARPA, we'll keep you in the loop. The wild card is the interest earnings, of course. I think you've provided some great direction on the service restorations and then doing research on more of the other topics. We'll start putting together a position filling list, and then as we hear more about the new tax lid, we'll provide you all feedback about that as well. So every year is new.
I'm sorry, Elizabeth, did you say the subtitle M, the eligible uses, is finished, or is it still giving direction?
No, well, the law has been signed. It's been
Right.
signed into law, but usually the next step is that Treasury will provide its guidance.
So they're still providing guidance on the eligible uses?
They've not started yet, so
Okay.
I think that first tranche is available in June, so I would expect some guidance before then. The timing would be ideal if we were to use our annual report, because that is finished on June 30th. So if that's the kind of backup documentation we need, it would be really good timing. So
Which one is SB 13?
that's the new tax lid law, the state of
Oh, tax
Kansas.
lid, yes, thank
That's the state of Kansas. One is federal, one is state.
Truth and taxation.
Yes, thank
Yeah.
you. Well,
Did I already say all the positions in MABCD? If not, then all the positions in MABCD.
Thankfully, it's a small
You put in your
department.
application to MABCD yet?
They're
Anything
out.
else? I think this is really helpful for us.
Just if you could keep us, if you hear about the, what is it, the interest rates, guidance on that.
Yeah, you bet.
If we can get a heads up on that, I think could
Yeah, I
help us
already,
prepare for the next one of, these a lot easier.
As we get additional guidance, we'll keep you informed on it.
yeah, I sent an email. GFOA has a "Do you have questions?" website, and I sent that one in. I'm like, I've got a question, so we'll see what I hear.
I did have one, I don't know if it's completely correlated, but any employees that may have been laid off at some point, as we are looking at or filling positions, would they have priority on coming back? Like, instead of just having a position everybody can apply for, if they were a city employee and they are interested in coming back, would they have priority?
We typically give preference to those that were laid off without cause.
Okay.
Right. And I think that's what we did with those.
I don't.
And we did find some work for laid off employees in other parts of the organization
Okay.
as well.
Yeah, and I don't think that we had many layoffs of full-time employees outside of municipal court
C2.
and C2, and I think they were placed, a lot of them. So that's a sad place to leave things.
Yeah, so on that note, is there any other questions with this? If not, thank you, staff, and we look forward to getting more information and continue down the budget talks.
Yeah, thanks.
I do just want to not only thank, obviously, the finance staff, but also all the departments and the department heads. I know that this has been a process that they've had to go through and invest time into this process in addition to their already really busy schedules, and especially because positions have been frozen. So as I've talked to different departments, I know that they've been working really diligently and trying to think strategically about how we continue to be a really well-run city. So just want to thank staff at all levels within our organization.
And I appreciate this conservative approach. I like the good surprises of, hey, we have more, rather than the bad surprises. So definitely appreciate that approach that we're taking.
For sure.
All right, if there's nothing else, then If there's no objection, then we are adjourned. You got 5 minutes.